Hi, I'm Elise Naramore, and welcome. In this video, I'll walk you through how I implement the Learning Progression Model, or LPM, in my physics class. Whether you're a student, a parent, a colleague, or an administrator, this will give you a deeper look into how learning, assessment, and growth come together in my classroom. In this video, I'm going to walk you through one of my classes from beginning to end, outlining all of the most important things that I do over the course of the school year. I'll share how I choose what to focus on, how I assess it, how students track their growth, and how grades are determined using learning progressions. You'll also see how feedback, conferencing, differentiation all fit together into the system. Because this is about my class, this will be very high school and science specific, but don't worry. For those of you who are teaching neither high school nor science, this has been done by teachers of all students, from youngest to oldest in all content areas. But I want to give you some concrete examples. So I'm just going to use my classes in particular. This is my way of implementing it, and I make improvements every year. But I do believe it to be the best way to assess students. So let's get started. I want students to know what to do when they don't know what to do. This means they aren't afraid to fail, have an understanding of how to learn, and know how to make use of resources. The grades that students earn have meaning to them and to me. I'm going to clearly communicate with students not just how well they're doing at any point, but what next steps they can take to move forward. And I want them to work from the very first day until the very last day of school, using each day as an opportunity for growth. This may sound Pollyanna-ish, but traditional grading does get in the way of learning. There's lots of research about that. Students worry more about points than progress. The LPM shifts that focus. We track growth in important skills and practices over time. It's clearer, more meaningful, and more aligned with how learning actually works. When students know what they're aiming for and get clear feedback, they learn more deeply and take more ownership of their progress. When students have agency, they're more invested and then enjoy the learning process more fully. What would be better than that? Instead of generalizations, let me show you specifics about how I do this in my class. I selected 10 practices that cover the most important things for my students to know by the time they leave my class. In my physics classes, for example, I value practices like designing investigations, analyzing data, constructing explanations, and applying problem-solving strategies, amongst many others. Most of my practices are grounded in the next generation science standards, but I adapted, combined, and rearranged them for use in my own classroom. You can do this too. Practices go beyond content recall. They're the overarching skills that help students think like scientists, writers, historians, or mathematicians. Content becomes the medium through which the skills are taught. If we don't identify these practices overtly and upfront, it's very easy into just grading being right. That's easiest to grade, but not what matters most for student learning. Every activity, assessment, and conversation connects back to my practices. Once you know which practices you value, the next step is to design or select your learning progressions for each of those practices. A learning progression is a roadmap. It outlines what it looks like to move from novice to high quality performance in a specific skill or practice. And of course, the definition of novice and high quality changes with each course at every grade level. These first four focus on lab work. For example, in argumentation, a novice might simply make a claim and just provide a little bit of evidence, even if it's not good. The steps that follow gradually build towards presenting persuasive evidence and integrating accurate scientific principles. The next four target conceptual understanding, problem solving, and graphing skills. I use these on practice sets, quizzes, and tests. Listen, you don't have to build the learning progressions from scratch. It's hard work. You can adapt them from standards, frameworks, or other shared resources. I have tons of these available. What matters is that they are observable, developmentally appropriate, and aligned with what students actually need to do in your class all year long. Clear learning progressions make feedback more actionable and give students a visible path forward. These last two are tied to projects and communication. Overall, these learning progressions guide my feedback, my grading, and my planning. Using these learning progressions, I tailor the pacing depending on the course. At the start of the year, I determine what level students should be able to reach on each learning progression by the end of the course. This sets a clear target and helps students understand what growth looks like. In honors physics, the end of year goals are typically advanced on all 10 of my learning progressions. And of course, this is about pacing. Physics is physics, but how fast can a typical student assimilate the material and the skills? In an accelerated class like honors physics, students should expect to be challenged and to do more independent work. Therefore, they have enough time to progress to advanced. That's not true for all courses. The materials used are pretty much identical, but the ending levels are different because of the pace of the course. So this helps me to define success realistically while giving my students a clear destination to work towards. Once you know the end of the year goals, you can break down the progressions into smaller unit goals so that students can gradually develop their skills over time. These become the intermediate steps along the path to mastery. Each unit builds towards the end of year goals, and you can adjust these as needed. I'll show you that later. I work at a traditional grade school. Therefore, I have to report out grades periodically. You probably do too. So how do I turn learning progression scores into a grade? I tie the grades to those target levels. If a student has met the targets, that's an A. This way, the targets can change unit by unit without changing the grade translation. As long as students are improving over time, then they will be doing well. In my class, I only include assessments that are directly aligned to learning progressions: labs, checkpoints, and projects. I post grade translations at the end of each unit so that stakeholders know how they are doing. But in my classes, these are progress reports, and I don't have to average these into the final grade. Actually, I never average anything. Grades are just a snapshot in time reflecting what the student can do right now, not what they struggled with weeks ago or what they might be able to do in the future. The key is that the grade reflects the performance on meaningful targets, not a running tally of points or an average of scores. It's holistic, but evidence-based. Each unit includes multiple practice opportunities aligned with those learning progressions. I've completely streamlined my workflow. Labs include formal reports, as well as short activities. Checkpoints include quizzes and a unit test. Projects are based on engineering design. Every component connects back to at least one learning progression. Any scored assignment that we do fits one of these three categories. Otherwise, I use them as unscored practice or enrichment opportunities. Once you have set your targets, you can plan your unit activities to provide ample spiraled practice aligned with those targets. Spiraling means students repeatedly encounter the same skills in different contexts, which deepens their understanding over time. For example, in my physics classes, students practice designing investigations in every unit, even as the content changes. I give them feedback using the learning progression for designing an experiment multiple times each unit. Sometimes we do this as a class. Sometimes we do it through peer review. Sometimes I take them and I grade them as part of a formal lab report. We start at the beginning level in Unit 1, and gradually I move them across the rubric, focusing on building a solid foundation before adding complexity and detail. When this process is overt and systematic, I get to show students how learning really happens. There's a common misconception that students hold. They think we wake up one day as experts in something. I want them to know that to get good at anything, you must do authentic, repeated practice. Natural talent can play a role, but it only will take you so far, and that's where the work ethic pops in. This approach shifts my job from boss to coach, allowing me to identify my students' strengths and provide targeted feedback, enabling them to grow. Here's what it might look like in my class. The documents shown here are from Unit 2. The blue box shows the Unit 2 test with comments and feedback. The pink box shows one of the 3 lab reports with comment and feedback. And the yellow box shows just the scoring rubric for the Unit 2 project. The detailed feedback, as well as the document itself, was way too long to include on this slide. Because this was only the second unit, the targets were developing level for everything but the project, which were still at the beginning level because it was only the first one. We didn't do a project for the first unit. You could see that this student met all of the targets, even exceeding on the test with 1 proficient. Feedback guides the student in terms of what to do next time. In the next unit, they're going to have more opportunities, more practice, and they can use the feedback to improve. This consistent targeted practice is what helps students move up the learning progressions, rather than just completing tasks and filing them once they see the grade. Feedback in my class is descriptive, specific to the learning progression, and never tied to a letter grade. I give just enough next steps to help students move from where they are now to the next level. It's about improvement, not judgment. I use a wide variety of tracking systems. I had to modify my old methods because in the learning progression model, I'm not tracking points. I need to track growth in specific practices. So I created a simple spreadsheet. I often just use an old fashioned paper grade book to record, but now instead of recording a grade, I record the performance on the various assignments for each learning progression. So I can then plan, support where needed. This is only for my records. This is not for the students. An important part of tracking is giving students ownership of their data. I want my students to keep track of their own scores on the learning progressions because this allows them to see their growth over time. They can see patterns, which we'll talk about soon. It helps them see where they are, where they're going, and what steps they need to take next. This gives them agency over their own performance. I am no longer the bestower of grades. I want to eliminate the mystery of their performance. And this is an important piece of shifting my role to coach. I provide students with this tracking log and time to monitor their own progress. If they update it regularly, they can use it to reflect on their strengths, set goals, and prepare for conferences. For grades, I use a patterns of performance approach. Rather than averaging every score, I look at the most consistent and recent evidence on each learning progression. Let me show you a specific example. This log shows a series of 7 lab scores, with the scores for each of the 4 learning progressions across each row. Since we do so many lab reports, up to like 25 a year, I'm looking for sufficient evidence, which in this case would be 3 identical scores in a row or 5 scattered to demonstrate that the student has met the target. So let's go through this. Looking at learning progression 1, I would give them developing because they don't have 3 proficients in a row yet. LP2 would be 3 proficients in a row, so they'd have proficient. For LP3, they'd have 5 proficients scattered because advanced includes proficient. And LP4 has 3 developings in a row, that would be developing. This approach focuses on trends, not isolated moments, and allows us to see real growth over time. Students need help understanding this system because it's different. So at the end of each unit, I provide them with this sheet. Paired with the tracking log, they can figure out what their grade is, where their strengths and weaknesses are, and make sure that they always know where they stand, not only with my goals, but with their own goals too. I had to modify how I use the electronic gradebook around the learning progressions. This allows me and my students and their parents to see growth clearly rather than just tracking points or percentages. These online gradebooks are not designed to support alternative approaches, unfortunately, so I've had to modify it to the best of my ability. While not ideal, with the use of comments, I can update stakeholders on students' current performance levels, as well as lab minimums and conferencing requirements, unscored data. Because I want to make decisions based on data, I also use a spreadsheet to analyze performance at the end of the unit. This is not for everybody. This is for my use so that I can determine if students are ready to move to the next level. I look at each student's trend from one unit to the next to see if they're moving in the right direction. This way, I can make sure no one gets left behind. And because I track performance over time, I can use that data to adjust instruction, identifying students who need support and tailoring my feedback. It helps me spot patterns across the class and adjust my teaching accordingly. I will often change my end of unit targets based on the results of the previous unit. As students work and I collect data, I conference with them about their progress. I do this about 3 times a year, sometimes more. These one-on-one meetings last 5 to 15 minutes and are scheduled around the school day. Students have told me that these are one of the most helpful parts of the class because they get personalized feedback and a much better understanding of what they need to do. These conversations build ownership and help students see learning as a process, not just a series of grades given to them. I want them to understand, again, where they are, where they're going, and what steps they need to take to get there. It gives them agency over their own performance. And this is an important part of coaching. Conferences give me a chance to better understand what students are struggling with, both in class and personally, in ways that don't always show up on assessments. The LPM also supports differentiation. I struggled for years trying to figure out how to do this, but this becomes much easier. Students who are ready can move to higher level tasks or explore independent projects. Those who need more help get scaffolds and targeted support. I use flexible tools like tiered assignments, choice boards, and guided checklists to adapt for diverse readiness levels. But I'm not making new material. I'm using the learning progression to guide these changes. So as I head into the end of the year, I incorporate all sorts of activities to help students reach their goals. To remediate any practices where students are below target, I use literally boot camp mode. During the final exam session, students get time for final evidence opportunities as well as self-reflection. Reducing the impact and stress of high stakes assessments, I keep the focus on patterns of performance. What matters is where the student ends up, not where they started or how long it took them. While I've shown you how I use the LPM in my classroom, this is just my way of implementing it. Teachers in all subjects and grade levels have adapted the model to fit their needs. I hope this gave you a clearer picture of how the model works and how it might work for you. I know I just threw a lot of information out at you, but I wanted you to get an overview of all the moving parts and how they work together. To learn more, visit my website, subscribe to my Substack, or check out my YouTube playlists for more detailed guides. You can also email me for more tailored assistance. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.